Hello, welcome to another episode of Engineering Our Future. I'm Nicolai and I'm with Luis. How you doing, Luis?
Doing great. I'm excited about this topic and conversation.
Good. I guess just jumping right in, I had an experience recently where a new team member joined my team, and I have an opportunity to sit down with them and just kind of express and explain some of the styles that I have and get to know them. But through that conversation we talk about success and failure and how I would love our team to handle them, right?
Mhm.
And it kind of she's new on my team, so she doesn't really know who I am, and she kind of gave me a look of like, okay, what do you mean by that? Maybe got a little nervous about what I was going to say, and we ended up having a good conversation about just how I hope our team really embraces the success and we own not only our success but we own our failures too, right? And so I thought that would be a good thing to just kind of discuss here with the group and kind of see some of the thoughts that you've had on it, some of the ways maybe you've applied some of this stuff, and we'll go from there. Does that sound good?
Yeah, and I think that's something that we have touched on in the past with just the goal setting process and kind of the annual review process. But I think we have talked a lot about the positive, which is great because that's kind of what you want to present in those circumstances. But I think we'll be touching a little bit on the other side of the coin, the negative. What happens when you receive maybe a not so positive feedback, maybe a little more constructive, or when you feel discouraged because something didn't go the way you wanted it to go? What happens then? What are the things that you can do? You can reflect on how create a process that you can look at those mistakes and not just take them as mistakes and forget about it, but how can you learn from them? So I think I'm very excited about this conversation, and I think it's going to complement well some other episodes that we have recorded in the past.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, just in general, taking ownership of our work. We're professionals, and we're delivering this service to clients, and we really need to take that pride and ownership of what we're doing. I mean, what we do is really important, but sometimes it can be easy to fall into the trap of we're so busy, we're just checking some boxes and moving on to the next thing. But when we truly take ownership, then we are able to then reflect a little bit more and grow through some of these experiences. Now, when I work with some of my younger staff, I explain to them that failures are normal. Errors are normal, and don't be afraid of them, but own them. If you are working on a project and you are kind of seeing like something is maybe going wrong, or you something is wrong but it's because of something, a mistake you made like a month ago, we're not here to sweep that under the rug and try to cover our tracks and stuff like that. If we truly own it and we can just say, okay, I made this mistake, this is where it led us to, but this is going to be the solution. That's a much better approach when you own that. But real quick, I know we have talked about owning success. Um, really in the past when we've talked about owning success, we talked about like how to document it for preparing for our annual reviews, or setting up a celebration when you reach a goal. But I really want to talk about too, like it's really important just to embrace your success too. It's really important to have those little mini celebrations when you achieve a milestone in your job, or you submit a deliverable with very few comments, or maybe you're just really proud of how you served a client in a interaction with them. You know, Again, we don't want to get into the trap of just running from one thing to the next. Like, sit down, reflect, and just think about it. So when you have celebrated kind of your own successes, or actually, let me ask it this way first: do you feel like you struggle celebrating your own successes?
I honestly do a lot of times just because I want to improve so much or making sure I am doing the right things. So when something good happens, I'm like, that's just kind of part of the process and kind of move on to the next thing. But something when something bad happens, that's when I kind of take a time maybe to reflect a little deeper into okay, what went wrong, how can I improve it? And I think we are talking about this before. I don't recall what the actual research says, but I think it's a ratio of like four good things contradict like
Oh,
one bad thing. So every bad thing, you need like four good compliments or four good positive accomplishments to counteract that. So the negatives are weigh so much more on us than the positives do. So learning how to balance those, and I think having, for me, I just like to have a list of things that are going well, some of the things that are going bad, and the list usually, seeing it side by side, I think helps balance those two things. And I obviously don't feel great when something bad happens, but at the same time, it's kind of part of the process and part of the improvement that kind of we all need. And something that I have encouraged everyone that I work with is providing feedback, even if it's uncomfortable, it hurts. As engineers, we don't like to be told we're wrong, but sometimes we just need that little bit of a nudge. Say, hey, I didn't like, or I didn't it didn't work out well how we communicated in the last project. What can we do to improve it this next time around? So here are some of the things that I prefer as an individual, and often that happens when you're working with new team members, when you're working maybe on a different project that has different requirements in terms of deliverables, timeline, budget, schedule, all of that stuff plays a big role in how you perform at your job. So knowing those things and balancing them, I think is important. And again, the bad and the good kind of get mixed up a lot of times, but we're often, our minds are more prone to having those negative thoughts a lot of times
yes.
than having those positive reinforcement.
I totally agree with you. I also personally struggle to kind of celebrate that success, celebrate those positives. Honestly, it makes me uncomfortable. You know, I recently got an email, and I mean, I get plenty of bad emails, just so you know. But I got a good email recently, and this guy, I mean, a CEO of a company was just saying, "Great job, you know, this is what you did," and I hated reading it. Like it just made me uncomfortable. But 6 years, 7 years ago, I probably would have just thrown it in the trash and said, "All right, we're moving on to the next thing." But about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I was, I felt like I was probably on top of my game. Like I don't know, things were going really well. And there were some things at work I was doing. There were some things at home I was doing. There were some things in my community that I was doing, and I was just go 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 go. And things were successful, positive experiences, not just for me, but for the people that I was working with. And I just did not feel positive about anything, you know? And as each event ended and as each success happened, like I just, all right, what's the next thing? Because I was just so busy. And so one of my friends, he says, Nick, you have to sit down and reflect. And so he's the one that actually taught me about the importance of this and how to kind of do it. So some of the steps he told me to take were you have to sit down first. Like you have to pause, and I can get too busy sometimes. And so that's hard for me. I don't know, maybe it's not for other people, but it's really hard for me just to pause. And then write down. Like I actually did write all this stuff down and say, okay, what was this one event? Uh, what did I do? Who did I do it for? What was the impact to them? And do I have any takeaways from it that I can celebrate? And then I went to the next event or the next thing I was working on. Same thing. And by the time I got through it all, again, it was really difficult for me because you feel like you're patting yourself on the back, and that's, I don't know, it's just awkward. But I'm telling you, going through that, if it almost was like gave me closure for a positive thing. Sometimes you have things in your life that come up and it's a negative and you just never kind of close that door, so it kind of lingers and festers for a little bit. I was letting that happen with my positive stuff. And so by sitting down and really reflecting and kind of even journaling, if you want to say that, because I was writing it all down, um, that really helps. And actually to this day, so I still have this note in my phone. And so to this day, when I'm kind of struggling, I'll go back through and reflect on some of these positives that I've done and be like, all right, Nicola, you have done good things. You have made positive impacts. And so there's that benefit of that too, that I didn't really realize would ever be a benefit at the time. But it's just kind of nice to kind of go back and look on some of those. So Do you have any other tips on the celebrating the positives and embracing that success before we go to the negative stuff?
I think like what you're saying is it's an excellent way to do it. Is just taking the time to reflect, and I think just not only for yourself, but I think just having the benefit of just that mental health being of hey, I am I'm getting all this feedback from other people. It's not like I'm not getting the feedback or I'm trying to ignore it and taking that for what it's worth. And maybe it's just a hey, write down on your notebook on a piece of paper on your phone whatever and let it sit for a little while and then maybe come back for it in a week and see how that feels like. Oh, actually, like looking back, that was actually a pretty good accomplishment that I didn't celebrate at that time. So I think it sometimes just takes a little time to reflect on those things and celebrate them in a sense. And I mean, just thinking about it as what we do for as engineers with bridges, with buildings, with roads, with everything. Sometimes we're so ingrained in a project and our work, we focus on it for a year, 2 years, 5, 10 years. Sometimes these big projects go on for a long time, and at the end of the road maybe we're burnt out, we're tired, and it's hard to look back and see how much we accomplished during that time, and we just want to move on to the next thing. But taking the time to like sit back and look at the project as a whole, hear the things that happen. If you are a design engineer, you can go out there and see actual design come to fruition and feel it and touch it and do all of these things that uh, the hard work sometimes is hard to see it when you're within the experience. But like Steve Jobs said, it's easier to connect the dots looking back than looking forward. So make sure
Hmm,
you
I
take the
like that.
time to reflect, and even if it's writing it down and looking at it in a week, 2 weeks, a month, I think that's gonna start bringing more value than if you're trying to do everything all at once.
Yeah, no, that's great. All right, so now owning the mistakes, owning the maybe not the not so positives here. This also can be uncomfortable. We as engineers like perfection. We like things to be right. And so if there's an error, that can bother some of us. Um, well, most of us. So, as any sort of professional, I think it can be tough. But as a young professional, I know that I did not like my errors coming to light because I felt like it was going to reflect negatively on me. I felt like my boss was going to be upset with me for making an error. I tried to hide things, or I would make an excuse like, oh, well, so and so didn't do this, so I didn't get this. Or, well, I didn't have this information, so whatever. I just, I've made excuses tons of times, but as I grew in my career, I realized you have to embrace them and you have to learn from them. And a failure is not necessarily a failure if you learn from it. It's just an opportunity to grow. And so when it comes to embracing our failures or owning those, do you struggle with that? And how are some of the ways that you have kind of overcome some of those?
Yeah, and as you were talking about it, just kind of embracing the mistakes, especially if you're working at a team, and even more, especially when if you are the leader or one of the higher ups within that team, it just shows your leadership. Honestly, like having a team and not owning the mistakes for the team as a leader, it just shows, in my opinion, just poor leadership. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's not directly your fault, but you're overseeing the team and you're seeing you're kind of gluing everything together. And everyone in the team obviously needs to own the mistakes and reflect on them. But as the team leader, as the person that is leading that, I think a lot more responsibility falls within that person. So I think what you were saying is completely true. Especially, I mean, I'm still pretty young in my career. I think I'm 6, 7 years out of school. So getting into that kind of maybe not so young part of it, but I did struggle a lot kind of early on, like you were saying. I don't want people to see that I'm not a good engineer. And obviously, when you make mistakes, you start thinking that maybe you're not good enough for engineering. Maybe you will never get the next promotion. Maybe you will even if you're very traumatic. No, how do you say that? Tragic. You could lose your job if you
Sure.
make too many mistakes. So It's hard for I mean, for me, I'm talking from personal experience. Hard for me sometimes to look at the mistakes and think about the positive that come from it. But I realize, and I tell this to my supervisor, people I work with, like if I don't not getting that feedback, I never know if I'm getting making that mistake. So it's more important to me to feel ashamed for a little while, look at my project, look at my notes, and see what went wrong, and then move on to how can I solve it. Because again, if I know I don't know what happened, what went wrong, it's going to be impossible to move on from that and make it better.
Yeah. Oh man, okay. So I have an example actually from this week for my own work. So I have a project manager that I work with, and we've been working and developing a pretty good relationship over the last year and a half or so. We're still figuring each other out. There's still some nuances of each other that we're trying to, work through, but the relationship has been good. And I was kind of getting the feeling recently that, you know, uh, there have been some things a little out of my element that I've had to, seek help on, and I've made a little mistake here or there, but thankfully, we have a solid review process, so they're going through. But I just had a feeling like he was holding back giving me some feedback, and so I had a conversation this week just saying, look, I love feedback, and just come right out and say, you don't have to beat around the bush. You can just come and say, this was the thing I noticed. This was the thing that we can improve. And I, I was trying to kind of lead up in that moment and just let him know, like, hey, I'm all for it. So don't hold it in because that's going to bother him, right? That's going to give him then resentment working with me in the future. And I mean, he knows everybody makes mistakes. Everybody is still learning. This is a thing I've never really done before. So obviously I'm learning through it. But I felt like it just kind of helped him see, oh, okay, yeah, let's do it. And so we actually had a really good talk after that. And he brought up some things, and some of those things I didn't love hearing, but at the same time, I kind of knew them, and in the back of my mind and in my heart, that I was like, oh, I'm just these are the things I need to improve. But just saying them out loud and hearing somebody say them out loud, it was like, man, okay, let's go. Let's learn from this. Let's make a proactive action item to move on from this and improve and grow. And I mean, the rest of my week ended up being great after that conversation. As a leader to other people, something that I do is I always use the word we, and I find that really helps. Hey, we made this mistake. It might have been one person who made the actual calculation mistake, right? But we made this mistake. I have a role as a leader to help grow and mentor and train, and maybe I didn't give them enough training in that moment. We have people who check things. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they missed that part too. Like whatever it is, it's we, and so it kind of takes a little bit of that, like that finger pointing. Like, oh, you did this. That's never any good. That doesn't help. But it's like, hey, what are we going to learn from this? And I really do feel, and maybe I'm off, but I feel like the team appreciates that, and it kind of takes the edge off a little bit. And then we have these project debriefs, we're calling them. It's just a lessons learned, but we're trying to start implementing these where we are inviting feedback from everybody, but we never give feedback without allowing. So let's say an upper is giving feedback to a lower person, right, or a less experienced person. um, we never give that feedback to that earlier career person without inviting them to give feedback back up. Again, it's a we thing. So it was uncomfortable for the first few, early career professionals to kind of give that feedback up. I mean, you have to approach it in a good way, not an accusatory way, but just like, this is what I saw, this is what I felt. Um, and then we can kind of talk through it, but they've been going really well, and people have owned their errors and mistakes, and then we grow as a team through it. So I'm really excited to see how that continues to play out. I'm really excited to see how things progress in the team, and hopefully we continue to kind of develop this growth mindset, not be scared of failure, not be scared of errors, but just owning them from that point forward, and learning from them. So
Yeah, and I can think of a couple examples for myself too, kind of early in the year, just struggling to do work, especially remote. Sometimes when things slow down, you kind of lose concentration, lose focus, and then when things pick up again, you are maybe not on your A game, and just having the mindset of, okay, I haven't been the best that I could be. I know what standards are for me, and I brought that up to one of my supervisors, and just the fact that I brought it up, talked through it, heard their side of it in terms of, hey, I haven't seen anything concerning. It's just kind of part of the process. Like you were saying, like everyone has their good weeks, their bad weeks. That instantly just made me feel a lot better. I performed great that week, and I've been doing great since then. But imagine if I hadn't had that conversation with them, I would just have been stuck in that same mindset of, hey, I'm not doing good, I'm not doing good, I'm not doing good, and everything's gonna stay the same. Um, so not only like accepting to receive it, but when you feel like you're maybe not doing something that is up to your standard, just bring it up to someone else or have that conversation. It doesn't need to be your supervisor, it could be a friend outside of work, could be your significant other, whoever. But I think having those external conversations it's important. And I think with the feedback, like we were talking about before, just having a way to get that feedback and improve. I mean, if you think back of examples like Blockbuster or Kodak that failed because they didn't accept that kind of feedback. They were seeing that their sales were declining, that everything was not going the way that we're going for many years before that, but then they didn't accept that feedback and adjusted their approach to their work.
Hmm.
You see what that led to. So imagine if you do that with your career. If every time you hear feedback, you're like, nope, I'm doing what I'm doing, and I think that's right, and you don't move on to the next thing, and you don't move on in your career. Like that's when problems start manifesting. And I think as engineers too, as especially younger engineers, we're so afraid of failure that even when we see mistakes, we're afraid to call them out. Like I can think of an example. I think it was a couple years ago. We had a design, we submitted, it was actually approved, but looking back there was just a small mistake. It didn't affect the overall result. Basically, like changing that wouldn't have made like the structure fall down or anything. um, so I brought it up to my supervisor. Hey, I was looking at this, I saw there was a small mistake, I ran the calculations, I think everything is fine. We keep record of that, and he like and he was great, nothing to worry about. Like, thanks for bringing it up. That's kind of our duty as engineers, especially if we see something that is not right. And thankfully there was nothing catastrophic. It was not gonna fail or overstress or anything. But just having that mindset of, as engineers, we are almost on duty to have those kind of mindset in terms of like seeing something, and saying something. I can think of something else here before we move on to the next thing. But I was coaching soccer last summer, and here in South Dakota, it gets pretty windy, kind of out on the plains, and it's not a very pleasant place to be when it's windy and cold. But there was this signal structure which catches a lot of wind, and from the tilting back and forth, a couple of the bolts at the bottom were just completely stripped and they fell out, and
Ooh.
that thing was like rocking, and there are little children around, cars around. So I immediately like went to the supervisor of the grounds and everything. It's like, hey, this is a hazard, like you need to get something figured out here. So I set up with them, and obviously the welds were cracked, there were bolts in the floor, and we kind of just cleared the space there in case something bad happened. But again, just having that mindset of, hey, I see something and I say something, it could be my error, could be someone else's error, but if I don't solve it, I'm not doing my job as an engineer at the end of the day, because we are kind of in charge of the well-being of society, basically.
Yeah. I would like to say, and I don't know how many supervisors we have listening, but if we have any, just as a supervisor, please make sure you are giving that feedback to your team. They do want it. uh, and an email when something goes well. Celebrate them. Then they can use that to archive again to kind of build that annual review backup data. If I ever hear a project manager praise one of my employees, I go to that employee and just say, "Hey, this is what I heard you did. Great way to go." And just think they really appreciate that, and just the recognition is good. So to help them celebrate, uh, us supervisors really can do a really good job there. And then on the feedback side of things, and this is hard for a lot of us, but we're giving feedback a lot, but I would ask the supervisors listening to really embrace that culture of requesting feedback from your staff. Invite them to give you critiques. Invite them to say one thing. I have a new hire. Just sent him our 1 month checkup. Like he literally is 1 month. So on Monday, we're gonna meet. And in the agenda, I actually put in there, give me one thing. I mean, maybe more if you want, but like at least one thing that you think that I can improve. I'm just setting the tone from his early, few weeks that I'm asking for that. I'm looking for that to improve as his supervisor to better serve him. And we'll see what he comes up with. But it's I think just creating that culture is takes time. There's people that are a little hesitant to it, or maybe even resistant to it. They don't know if that's really what they want, or how it's going to benefit them. But if they feel that trust and they feel that kind of safety in the team, I think you're going to feel it. It's also a really good way to gauge how safe and how trusting your team is. Because if they're not giving you any feedback, well, there might be a red flag there, right? But if they do, then that kind of just shows that there's some safety and trust there. So lots of benefits to all of it. But I think I've said probably everything I wanted to say on the topic. Is there any final thoughts on that you would like to mention?
Yeah, as you were talking, I was just thinking that, especially I think young engineers, but also managers, sometimes it's hard. I wouldn't say like hard in the sense of it's difficult, and we do struggle a lot of times giving that positive feedback as well, because we when things are going well, we're kind of autopilot sometimes. We're like doing the work and designing and having communication and everything is going well. And we don't sometimes struggle to reflect why things are going well and giving praise where praise is due to other people that are doing good things. But when things go bad, that's when stressful situations happen, and we are maybe a little bit more on edge on work and trying to figure out how can we improve it. Doing a little more of that, maybe balanced reflection, I like to call on reflecting on when things are going good, when things are going bad. And I think the debrief you were mentioning is a great place to reflect on those things. Maybe you look back on the project when smooth, nothing happened. Maybe reflect on what made that possible. Was it someone that stepped up when someone maybe was out of office, was sick? Was it someone that took maybe extra leadership to make sure everything was taken care of? Those kind of things sometimes go unseen because we are focused on getting through the project a lot of times. When everything is going well, nobody sits and reflects on what's happening. But when something goes wrong, we try to fix it because we're problem solvers. We want to make sure everything is fixed. Think back on kind of some of the bigger companies in the world. They have their annual letter to the stakeholders, and they reflect on some of the things that happen in the year. And they're not just negative things that they want to improve. They also reflect the good things, how those maybe change the way they look at their companies. And from the good things, you can also learn how to approach the errors. So again, having that balance reflection, I think is important. And I personally don't do enough of it, and I'm trying to get better at that. But having that mindset of, hey, even with the good things are going, when projects are going good, why is that happening? Am I sticking to my task list every day? Am I looking at my calendar on Monday morning and looking ahead of the week and make sure everything is lined up? What are the things that I'm doing that is making my job easier? Because when it's not easy, when it's hard, when things are going wrong, we do that reflection, but we're kind of in the middle of this maybe hole, and it's hard to see outside as well.
Yeah, that's good. I think we just need to remember this all takes time.
Mhm.
And it takes proaction. I don't know about you, but sometimes it just feels like I don't have time, and I really need to force myself to do this. I really have to make it a priority. It's just important. And I think when we do this, when we do celebrate success, when we uh, own our failure, we're going to learn all this stuff eventually, but you might have accelerated that learning and growth days, months, or even years. So why wouldn't we want to try to accelerate that growth and accelerate that learning and just get better for the next one that much faster, right? So just we talked about some strategies and how to do some of these things, but it's really still on you to make that a priority and do it. And I hope the listeners on here, if you haven't kind of created uh, that habit, if you haven't kind of created that routine in your projects or just in your daily life, just try it. Don't go crazy and do everything. Maybe just try to spend 5 minutes. But 5 minutes is still better than zero.
Yep.
So I hope that people have some good takeaways from this and they can implement it.
So I just wanted to end the episode with just a kind of summary of all the things we talked about. We discussed a lot of things, so I think it's just a great way to end it here. As I kind of reflect on what we talked about, the word reflection kind of comes to mind a lot, and I think you do a good job at just kind of reflecting on good things that happen, bad things that happen, and having an inbox on the email that you can just reflect to when you need to. I'm personally trying to do a lot more of that. I like to just kind of write it down and maybe have a list that I'm actually just near my annual review, so I've been thinking a lot about this
Ooh.
more often. And it's kind of nice that it's kind of at the beginning of the year, because then I have the reflection from the end of the year, and then I look at everything that happened the year prior, and it's easy to come to that review a little more prepared. So some of the things that we talked about, and just the mistakes part of it, and applying or reflecting on those mistakes, I think it's important. And not only that, but I think acknowledging the things that happen, and I think also very importantly, communicating that to the person that gave you the feedback, saying, hey, I took your feedback, these are some of the things that I want to be doing. Because sometimes we just take the feedback, and I'm not as bad as I was before, but when I was growing up just playing sports, I was a little volatile, if you will. I was not the calmest person, but I think having that feedback, it hurts when you hear it. And I try not to say a lot during those conversations, and I can acknowledge it, just kind of internalize it, and then I come back maybe a day or two later when I have time to like internalize everything, when I've had time to kind of create a plan of what's going to improve, and I come back to that person and say, hey, I really appreciate your feedback. I can see these things need improvement. I can recognize some of these things just kind of reflecting are happening. Here are the things that I want to do kind of moving forward. So that reflection piece, I think both for the positive and negative are very important. But as you receive that feedback, I think it's also important to communicate that back to that person, and making sure, especially if it's your supervisor, or if it's a conversation that was maybe hard to listen to, maybe something that really went wrong. Having those conversations, I think, can create that trust that you were talking about within the team, and maybe as you progress in your career and within the company, projects are going to be a lot easier if you have those kind of communications.
I think you had a golden nugget in your summary there of when you're hearing that feedback, not just kind of hearing it, taking a breath, and maybe not responding right away. That's huge. We should have talked about that earlier, because that is, well, you're not just there to take it. Like, don't just, you're not just taking this negative thing, especially if somebody's starting to get heated on their feedback, right? But that is such a mature thing of just saying thank you. Appreciate it. I'll reflect on this. That's big. So I hope people do that too.
Yeah, great. This was awesome. This is a conversation that it's for me, it's hard to have. Again, I try to think about the bad things too much and try to improve it too much. But at the end of the day, learn to celebrate those good things. I think you have a great of example, and a great guide to people to do it. And especially coming from a manager, it's kind of hard to hear sometimes those bad things, and the good things kind of get shoved under the rug. But I think you do a great job of that. So I'm excited
Yeah.
to continue exploring that. And yeah, thank you so much for having this conversation with me again. If you really enjoyed this episode of the Dream Future podcast, you're going to love the content we have over our website at luisfelipeduque.com. You can find the link in the description of this episode, as well as the show notes at luisfelipeduque.com/podcast. Every episode comes packed with a lot of links, a lot of information. So you can find all the show notes and all the information related to this episode over at luisfelipeduque.com/podcast. Thank you so much for coming back to this episode. Thank you, Jack Windows, for the music. And as always, let's continue engineering our future.